David, open it up for us.
Welcome to Fun with Astronomy.
Okay.
That's all I got. I got nothing else. Sorry.
That's okay.
Fun.
I threw it on him last minute. Welcome, everybody. Welcome. It's been a good week, Steve. It's been a really good week.
It's been a great week.
I'm very pleased. Very pleased. I've never laughed so hard with Hugo and Jake. Those guys were great. If you haven't seen it, go watch that.
It's so funny. So funny. I mean, they just work so well with each other for a comedic routine, right? And they know their shit too. That helps.
They do. And we'll say hello to ParallaxNick. A quick thing about ParallaxNick. I have been watching him since before we even started this show. And at that time, he was Parallaxicality. And I'm just curious why the switch in the names from Parallaxicality to Parallax.
I did not like it. I did not like to switch the name. I actually quite like that name. I've been using it for a long time on a lot of forums, but people just couldn't spell it, and they kept on complaining that they would go onto YouTube trying to find me, and they couldn't figure out how to spell my name. And this was happening over and over and over again. And I finally just relented and said, okay, I'll pick something easier to remember. And
was it more difficult to spell or pronounce?
Well, I think it was just spelling. People just couldn't, because parallax is a hard word to spell anyway because of the double L. A lot of people, and people when there's a double L, people sometimes switch it with a double R. And then it's a made up word that I made up. So I mean, no one's gonna be able to remember it unless they studied it, So I swapped it out. Sorry.
Are you fine? Go ahead.
I was just going to say I swapped it out, and everyone. It seems overall the result has been positive. That more people have said that they approve of what I did than disapprove. So
excellent. Well, either way, you have fantastic videos, and the link to ParallaxNick's channel is in the description. Make sure that you go and subscribe to him because you will not be disappointed. All of his videos are fantastic. So at the top of the show, everybody knows now that we do the Red Herring Report, and tonight is Steve's night, and I believe that Steve has a fantastic topic for us to discuss for the first 5 minutes of tonight's show. So, Steve, what exactly are we going to be talking about tonight?
We're going to be talking about a new space agency that I'm going to be actually joining here in the future. I'm not going to be the king of it because there's already a self-proclaimed, unelected, undemocratic ruler of this particular region of space. But there is a group of people called Asgardia, and this group literally has established in orbit a satellite claiming that they have dominance in the particular region of the satellite, actually in the satellite. And this is not so small thing. This is a group of like 200,000 people.
Let's fix this first, Steve. Let's fix this slide, Dave. We need something that doesn't work. There we go. Okay.
That makes more sense.
Asgardia. So you said 200,000 people.
200,000 people. It is a huge event. These people have actually believed or convinced themselves that they are going to colonize space because this guy that you're looking at is a multi-billionaire, and he's bored. So he has nominated himself to be king. What?
The thing is, though, how they're proclaiming to be a foreign nation, like a different nation. They're actually trying to petition the UN to declare them a nation. And do you want to know how they're doing this, or what they've done to justify them asking the UN to be a sovereign nation?
Go ahead.
They sent a hard drive up in space.
A 1 terabyte hard drive. It was a half or a full. I don't even remember.
It was a tetrabyte capacity, but they only filled it up halfway.
Oh, okay.
And it's got people's pictures on it, songs, and they claim that because they have personal stuff up there on space, they're a sovereign nation.
It's that big. It's literally 10 by 10 by 20 centimeters, which is about 4 inches by 4 inches by 8 inches. So so like that big. That's what they have a sovereign territory of. Inside that little micro or nano satellite. So how do they fit in there?
Outright.
How do you get 200,000 people in that little area if that's what they're calling a sovereign nation? I don't get it.
Nick, do you have any thoughts on Asgardia?
Maybe they're expecting to upload their consciousnesses into a hard drive.
Oh, we hadn't thought about that.
Live in a cyber utopia.
Hey,
that's a very good
point. That's what the extra space on the hard drive is. It's where all their consciousness is. Obviously, they don't have a brain and never thought this through.
That's a good point. The thing is, though, they have a national anthem. They had a ceremony where they had all of these people, what they call dignitaries and members of parliament there, and they had kids come out and sing the national anthem while they bestowed their new king with a metal. I don't know what do you call those things? Like
I'm guessing the new king is the old rich guy.
What's that, Nick?
So I'm guessing the new king is the old rich guy.
Yes.
Yeah. Exactly.
Oh, yes.
He's worth about $1 billion because he made his money off selling missiles to Putin.
Right. He's a oligarch that got his money in weapons trading, and so that's the guy that we want to be a king in space. Definitely.
Did that ceremony remind you of a Scientology ceremony in so many different ways? No.
I'll tell you what it reminded me of.
I told it to me.
The Hunger Games.
The Hunger Games? Yeah, you know what? That could be it too, yeah. It's bizarre. And this is not something we're making up. They literally have 260,000, I think, members across almost 200 nations. They are literally putting money into funding this. They've already got a satellite there. They plan to put more satellites up there. They are dead serious about starting a nation in space.
So let me give them some facts real quick, and then we'll wrap this up and hand the reins over to Nick to take us through the search for Planet 9. But these are just some quick facts for you guys to know about Asgardia, okay? It's the world's first independent space nation, founded in October of 2016, and it was named after a Norse mythological city of the skies, Asgard. The nation's free to join, and 200, like Steve said, 200,000 people from 204 countries have already done so. The population, let's see, only those who agreed to adopt the Constitution are considered full-fledged Asgardians. The largest populations of Asgardia, people-wise, live in China, Turkey, and the United States. Of course, the United States, where we have to have things different. The new nation's mission is to provide a peaceful society. Peaceful society from the guy who traded arms to Putin. That's great. Here's an interesting fact, though. Anyone over 18 with an email address can apply for citizenship, including ex-convicts, as long as they are clear of charges at the time of application. So we are all, I think, eligible because I have an email address. I can confirm that Steve also has an email address because I have emailed. And I actually can confirm that, Nick, you have an email address too, and so does Dave. So we all four can become Asgardians.
Yay.
I haven't planned on it. I'd like to find out about their...
They're looking for a mayor, by the way. If you want to become a mayor, they're looking for the mayor. That's what I'm going to apply to, is I want to become the mayor of Asgardia. Good. You got 2 weeks left for the elections.
I was just wondering, I'd like to know what their economic system is. I'd like to know what their economic system is, because I'm getting some very Bioshock vibes from all of this.
That's a good question. I don't think that... I'm sure that they covered that. In the list that I have right now, I don't have that, but that is a good question. I'll write that down because I think we need to dive a little bit deeper into this at some point. The last thing that I'll say is that Asgardia will not have an army, and the nation's citizens will not be able to take advantage of their dual citizenship. If they have problems on Earth, they can seek protection in the embassy of Asgardia. So anyone out there that has any legal trouble, Asgardia's got your back. You can fly away to Asgardia and you'll be safe. They will not return you.
Sounds like some kind of sanctuary. Well, yeah, but where are they flying to?
No, they're just going to be in low Earth orbit. They're building satellite stations in low Earth orbit that will just spin around the Earth. That's their thing. They don't want to be down here anymore.
But so far, the only thing they have a sovereign territory of is that nano satellite.
Yeah, now, Steve, you're not thinking long term.
Oh, I'm not thinking big picture. Okay.
You're gonna have cities and. Go ahead, Dave.
Go ahead, Kyle. I just have a non sequitur after this.
Okay, you go ahead. I was pretty much done.
Oh, I was just gonna say I have a message from Shannon Q. She wants to know where her fucking tank top is, Kyle.
Why are you taking her tank
yes,
top?
I haven't.
Oh yes,
I haven't uploaded that. I haven't uploaded that yet, Shannon. I promise to get that to you ASAP. I'll do it right after the show.
Was that the purple one that she wants? Was that she wanted something in purple? Okay.
Yeah, I'll upload that as soon as we get finished tonight. Thank you for reminding me. This has been a crazy week. So that's Asgardia. I figure for the next time we talk about it, Steve, I'll take the Guardians of the Galaxy poster, and it'll be the Asgardians of the Galaxy. I think that would work.
Yeah, that might
or
work.
You could just have Thor. Have Asgardians, actual Asgardians.
Yeah, would it be like more of a Thor thing?
I'm gonna try.
You need to get like the Bifrost Bridge, that kind of thing.
Could be. I'm not sure. I'm gonna have to research this, but I will be emailing some Asgardians to see if they will come on to talk about their space society. You can look for that in October. We will be having an Asgardian on here because they're campaigning to get new people, and what better place than here, right? Maybe we'll have it after the Soul Phone episode. That'll be a good segue. Okay, so we have ParallaxNick here to talk about my favorite topic, space, and a very particular part of space. That is Planet 9. It is different from Planet X or Nibiru for you people who think that we are going to be diving into the conspiracy-based version. That is not the case. We're going to be actually taking a scientific... that would be cool to come back. Yeah, come back and talk about that. We've done it before. We've talked about Nibiru. We had Digital Hammurabi on here to go through Nibiru with that for us. But I know that some people think that they're all interchangeable, and they're not. There actually could be a Planet 9 out there. And didn't they replace or call it Planet 9 for that very reason, because they wanted to get away from the Planet X?
Well, you have to understand that the person who is I'm getting a little repeat feedback. The person who proposed Planet 9 or co-proposed it is named Mike Brown. I don't know if have you heard that name before?
Yeah, he killed Pluto.
Yeah, he killed Pluto, and he was very, very insistent on calling it Planet 9 because he wanted to rub the fact that it was Planet 9 into the faces of people who thought that Pluto was Planet 9. You see, that was a very deliberate action on his part, and he also, although he's very fond of using the letter X in all of his provisional naming. I don't know if you're familiar with Sedna, the object that he discovered a while ago, back in 2006, which is now called Eris. For a long time, it was called Xena, as in Xena the Warrior Princess.
Oh, that's awesome.
And the reason why was because Xena starts with X, and he wanted to have a name that started with X for Eris, but no, he very deliberately named Planet 9 that as basically a middle finger to the Plutophiles. He's not a vindictive guy at all.
Oh no, not at all.
And actually,
Nick,
there was a petition. Sorry, there was a petition that was put up. I think it was on space.com, but Alan Stern, who's like the one guy who's constantly spearing to get Pluto put back as a planet, he organized this petition to stop calling it Planet 9. He was really, so it worked. Basically, he did manage to get up their noses about it.
Why do people care so much about Planet Pluto? Just as an aside, whether it's a planet or not, why do people attach such emotion to a rocky, icy body that's millions of miles away from us?
Well, I do have my own personal hypothesis. It's not based on anything solid. I don't think any hypothesis about this is. But Pluto's cute, and Pluto's always been cute. And well, not always. After 1978, it was cute because we found out how small it was, and how lonely it was, and how far out in the middle of the space it was. And who loves small, cute things? Kids do. And kids got really attached to Pluto, and now those kids are grown up. And this is something that really goes deep into their psyche all the way back to when they were kids. I mean, I loved Pluto when I was a kid. And come to think of it, everyone loved Pluto all over again when they finally got a shot of it, and it turned out to be a giant pink ball with a heart on it.
It was pretty.
Yep. It is pretty. But
people,
that makes sense, though. That makes sense. That makes sense.
Yeah. And I don't think you could say that about any other planet. Nobody cares. I mean, we probably should rename Uranus, and it would be very easy to do it. But if we did it, I don't think anyone would care. If we renamed Neptune or reclassified Neptune, I don't think anyone would care. I think if we reclassified Earth, I don't think anyone would care.
Nope. Just Pluto.
People
soft spot.
Yeah.
Soft spot.
Yeah.
We messed with the wrong planet. Okay, so Nick, why don't you introduce yourself to everybody? Let everyone know who you are and why you do what you do, and where they can find you on YouTube, and then you can jump straight in, and we'll pull up that first slide for you, Dave, and then you can begin when ready.
Well, my name is Nicholas Webb, aka ParallaxNick. I live in London. Obviously, I'm not a native Londoner. I was born in the U.S., but I've lived in London for 20 years. I've always had a lifelong interest in space, and as it happens, I was gifted / cursed with an eidetic memory. So I spent my entire life just gathering information on space, and then. As if my whole life was waiting for this, in 2001, Wikipedia was invented. And then all of a sudden I was able to just download all of the information that I'd that I learned about space throughout my life onto Wikipedia. And then over time, as I progressed on Wikipedia, I actually started creating a lot of featured articles on Wikipedia. And it just so happened, as this piled on, that my focus became more and more and more the planets and objects in the solar system. And then one day, a YouTuber named CGP Grey, who's one of the best educational YouTubers out there, and I hold no personal animus for him, against him for doing this. He didn't know what he was doing, and quite frankly, he didn't actually do anything wrong. But one of his videos was essentially a paraphrase of the Wikipedia article on Uranus, which I wrote. And after that, I realized that editing Wikipedia was a hopeless cause in the long term. And if I wanted to get some recognition for all the work that I was putting in, I'd need to do what CGP Grey did and start a YouTube channel. So I did, and that's where I am now.
Excellent. That's very cool.
All right.
Okay,
It's
all yours. The show is yours. Please take us on a journey to find Planet 9.
Well, the question, I didn't know until just now that not just now, but until like today, that the focus was going to be on Planet 9. But I do think that it's important to start at the beginning, because that's what Mike Brown does. Mike Brown, when he does his lectures on Planet 9, usually starts with Uranus. But I'm going to go a little bit further back, I think, because there's one fundamental point that's missed when talking about the planets, and that is that every single one of them was discovered. You often hear that the 5 planets visible to the naked eye were known to the ancients, but that's a very bland and blasé way of looking at it. It depends which ancients, it depends how ancient, and it depends how many. Our culture, our Western culture, our European quote-unquote culture, goes back to ancient Greece. Nearly all of our knowledge is ultimately based on ancient Greece. But the ancient Greeks were very, very, very flat about the fact that they didn't discover planetary motion. They didn't know about it until barbarians, as they called them, told them. But they didn't say which barbarians. And it was only in the 19th century when we started digging up all of the biblical sites like Ur and realizing that that Babylon had this massive library of clay tablet books that was crammed with astronomical data. And we suddenly realized that the barbarians that the Greeks had learnt from were the Babylonians. The Babylonians developed things like counting in 60s, which we still do today when we tell the time, and also when we measure angles. And the reason why is because telling the time and measuring angles are what you do in astronomy. In fact, a lot of people don't know this. Do you know why clocks run clockwise?
No.
It's because they're mimicking. It's because they're mimicking the motion of the sun on a sundial, and the mechanical. Yeah, the clock is basically a mechanical representation of the sky, and the fundamental purpose of astronomy since the dawn of civilization and even before then is to tell the time. But what you're looking at in this picture here is, I believe, Mars, Jupiter, and Venus, some of the three of the brightest of the 5 planets that are visible to the naked eye. And the point that I want to make throughout this lecture, if that's what it is that it's not enough to see a planet to know that it's there. You've probably seen a planet every day of your life and not even known it was there. I'm pretty sure most of you have probably seen Venus. You probably didn't know it was Venus, but if I were to tell you that it was Venus, you'd be able to spot it immediately. But you have to know that it's moving. You have to know that it's moving. And not every culture worked that out. Only some cultures did, and the rest learned it through osmosis. Most famously, and this blew my mind, but the ancient Egyptians never learned about it. The ancient Egypt was an insanely astronomical culture because they relied entirely on the flooding of the Nile to get their crops to grow. And the flooding of the Nile occurred very specifically at the height of summer. And they knew when the flooding of the Nile was about to occur because the star Sirius would rise right before the sun. This was called its heliacal rising. And when Sirius's heliacal rising occurred, they knew that that meant the flooding of the Nile was imminent. And interestingly, Sirius, of course, is the dog star, and that's why summer is called the dog days. Cool. So it's when you think about it, we still call Venus the morning star and the evening star, and in ancient Greek, that's Hesperus and Phosphorus. But that's a holdover from the time that we didn't know that Venus was a planet. When we thought it was 2 separate objects, we didn't realize that it was moving, and we didn't plot it. So the point is that discovering planetary motion is not obvious. It's not something that you can just do, and it gets really pertinent when you talk about. If you can flip the slide, please. This particular planet, I always call it the abstract art planet because it's completely featureless. This planet is actually visible to the naked eye. If you have really, really good eyesight and in really, really good conditions, you can see, and you know what you're looking for, you can see it. And yet, no ancient civilization, or modern civilization for that matter, ever saw it. Even though it's visible to the naked eye, they didn't recognize that it was there because they didn't see it move. And that, of course, is what the word planet means. It means wanderer. And if you don't see a planet move, it doesn't matter if you have the best technology in the world. If you don't detect a planet's motion, you can't discover it. Now, the guy who did discover this planet, next slide, please. That's him. His name is William Herschel. William Herschel is, or was, without any real competition, I would say the greatest astronomer of the 18th century. He was the best telescope maker of his era. His telescopes were 10 times better than any other telescopes made in the world. And when he actually announced that he'd found this object, he didn't know it was a planet at the time. He called it a comet, actually. When he announced his quote-unquote comet to the world, people didn't believe him. They didn't believe him because they couldn't see it, because they didn't have telescopes as good as the ones he used. And William Herschel was, in many ways, he was the first modern astronomer. I mean, there's a dividing line in astronomy between the old comfy version of the universe, where you have Earth in the middle and all the little planets orbiting it, and then this big sphere around it, and everything's sort of living in that solar system. Even Newton, who was a heliocentrist, and his vision of the universe was heliocentric, he didn't really think beyond the solar system. Herschel was kind of the first astronomer to realize that the universe was a lot bigger than we even knew. And he was the first astronomer to realize that stars die, that they are born. He discovered what he called calorific rays, but what we call infrared radiation. And he also discovered binary stars completely by accident, because he didn't know what they were. But oddly enough, the discovery of Uranus for Herschel was a fairly minor event in his life. It gave him everlasting fame, and it gave him a pension, but he wasn't interested in finding a planet. What he wanted to find was parallax. Now, at this point, I probably should explain what parallax is. But parallax is one of the most fundamental concepts in all of astronomy. And it's very, very simple. If you hold out your finger and put it in front of your face and cover one eye and then the other eye, but keeping your finger still, you'll notice that your finger moves.
It moves.
Yeah, that's parallax. And for thousands of years, parallax was the strongest piece of evidence that we had that the Earth didn't move, that the Earth was the center of the universe. And the reason was because if the Earth did move, then from one side of its orbit to the other side of its orbit, you would see a parallax shift in the stars. The stars would look like they were moving, but they don't. And once heliocentrism was finally accepted, and it was accepted pretty much because Isaac Newton presented his laws of motion and gravitation, which basically created a universe that finally made sense. And they basically said you can have this universe that makes sense, this beautiful clockwork universe where, you know, the same forces that allow you to play catch also keep the moon in orbit around the Earth and the planets in orbit around the sun. Or you can have geocentrism. You can't have both. And the scientific community were like, okay, we'll take that. But they didn't have any evidence for it. They didn't have any physical evidence for it because they still could not see the Earth move. And again, and do you know when we finally saw the Earth move? When we finally observed parallax? Do you know when that was?
No, it's not my head. Just
1838.
we are getting a little echo.
I'm sorry.
So if you want to maybe turn on
I was getting
your
an echo
speakers.
earlier, but
Yeah, Nick, try turning down your speakers just a little bit, because I think it's bouncing through the feedback on there.
Hold on just a second.
By the way, people in the live chat look like the gentleman on the screen. I am highly offended and just heartbroken right now.
Why?
That's all I gotta say.
Okay, I think the echo's gone. So let me ask you real quick. Is it true, because I've always kind of wondered this, if I remember correctly, Hesperus and Phosphorus, was it actually Pythagoras that actually was I mean, he's credited for, but did he actually determine that they were both Venus?
Possibly. The thing about Pythagoras is that he's kind of like Jesus Christ. He may or may not have existed. We're not 100% sure.
And there could be a new physicist position for Pythagoras now. That's great.
He may or may not have existed, and he was kind of a cult leader as well as, you know, a mathematician and a scientist. And so his people ascribed to him feats and accomplishments that he may or may not have actually done. It's like Pythagoras' theorem.
I can see it being a myth, but because I've always heard that it was Pythagoras, but
well,
never really got any real confirmation on that.
Pythagoras believed in this thing called the central fire, which I don't really understand. It wasn't the sun. It was kind of like an alternate shadow sun that orbited the sun. And Earth was supposed to go around that, and there was another thing called the counter-Earth, which was supposed to be like the alternate shadow Earth. And I don't really understand Pythagorean cosmology all that much. It's very strange, and the Pythagoreans were very strange. A little. Oh, sorry, Steve.
You're fine. Keep going. His camera just went down for just a second. It'll boot back up here in just a second.
Oh, there's a little story about Pythagoreans that I absolutely love. There's a fundamental fact of geometry that because of Pythagoras' theorem, if you take a square and you bisect it diagonally and create a right-angled triangle, right, and you call the sides of the square 1, then by definition, the diagonal of the triangle is root 2. It's the square root of 2. Okay, so if you have a square with a side of 1, the diagonal of the hypotenuse is root 2. Okay, and for decades and centuries, the Pythagoreans were obsessed with trying to prove that root 2 was rational, because what they wanted it desperately to be for whatever mystical reason. They felt that root 2, the diagonal of a square, had to be a rational number. But one of their own actually proved that root 2 was irrational, and they left him on an island so he couldn't tell anyone, and they just left him there to die so he would take his knowledge to the grave.
That's all kind of fucked up. Oh man, that's when you know you've messed up really bad on math, when they leave you on an island by yourself. I'm horrible at math, but I've never been left on an island.
He didn't mess up. He got it right.
Oh, I see. I got you now. Okay. They didn't want to accept it, so they left him on an island.
Yeah.
That's even more fucked up. Wow. That's crazy. But yeah.
Yeah.
Where were we talking about?
Oh, we were talking about William Herschel. Yeah, so William Herschel is a really important guy, and I do feel he doesn't get a lot of attention. His sister, Caroline, is also really important. And she was the first woman ever to be inducted into the Royal Astronomical Society. The second one, by the way, was in 1996. So that gives you an idea of just how male-dominated astronomy has always been. Next slide, please. Isn't it pretty? I love Neptune. And Neptune was discovered mathematically. It was the first planet ever to be discovered mathematically. It wasn't discovered by accident. It was actually predicted. And it was predicted because of Uranus. And Uranus has an 84-year year, which is long enough that you can get a pretty good, short enough that you can get a pretty good idea of what its orbit is doing compared to what you're predicting it's going to do. I mean, like I was saying prior to this started, most of astronomy is about making mathematical predictions. Johannes Kepler, who first formulated the laws of planetary motion and proved that planets moved in ellipses instead of circles, was nearsighted. He never looked at the sky. He never looked through a telescope. He spent his entire life calculating tables and plotting the motions of planets.
Though. Not to interrupt you, but that's kind of beautiful now that that's how we get a lot of our images from space.
Well, we get most of images like that from spacecraft. I mean, you would not be able to get that even with the Hubble telescope. You would not be able to get that kind of detail.
Yeah, but just the fact that he's out there taking pictures on the Kepler now, when he was nearsighted and never could see anything up in space, that's kind of poetic in a way.
No, I mean, I'm not talking about I mean, Johannes Kepler,
the original Kepler, but they are building a telescope that's using some kind of laser technology that's supposed to be even like 100 times more powerful than Hubble. They're not. That's ground based.
That's called adaptive optics. And what happens is you have this laser beam that you fire into the air, and there's this layer in the atmosphere that is opaque to that particular laser light. And what it does is the light bounces off the layer in the atmosphere, and it forms an artificial star in the sky. And because they know exactly what the properties of that star are, they can modulate the mirror to cancel out the blur in that star. And what happens is you have these computer programmed actuators underneath the mirror, and the mirror ripples and flows and folds to counteract the distortion in the atmosphere. So the idea is that you could never do it with the same size mirror as Hubble. There's just because it's you can never get that kind of precision on a mirror the size of Hubble, but you can. If you have a mirror that's a lot bigger than Hubble, and you have adaptive optics, then you might be able to get resolution better than Hubble. Hubble can only be so big because you have to get it into space, and so nowadays NASA and the other space agencies are being very specific about when they send up space telescopes, because they don't want to waste their time sending space telescopes up that are what's the word? Sorry, visual spectrum, that operate in the visual spectrum, because now that we have adaptive optics, we don't need it. But there are certain frequencies, like infrared, that famously the Earth's atmosphere absorbs infrared. It absorbs heat, which is why we have the greenhouse effect. So you can't get very good infrared astronomy below the atmosphere. So James Webb, the big James Webb telescope, the so-called Hubble 2, although it really isn't anything like Hubble at all, is an infrared telescope, precisely because that is impossible on Earth, or at least very difficult. Because, anyway, was that?
Yes, thank you. Yeah. Yes, thank you. Although they keep pushing back Webb. It was 2019, now it's 2020 now.
21. And I don't really blame them. The thing about Hubble is they screwed Hubble up. When it launched in 1990, they got it wrong. And there was a tiny, tiny imperfection in the mirror that essentially rendered Hubble completely useless. But they were able to fix it, because
they put a corrective lens on or something, didn't they?
Yeah, they basically gave it glasses. Yeah. And they can't do that with the James Webb. You can't fix it, because it's not going to be in orbit. It's going to be a spacecraft. It's going to go to a point called L2.
It's going to go long. How is Lagrange 2 this going to?
Yeah, which is beyond the moon. It's literally 1 million miles away. Literally 1 million miles away. And so it's going there. It's going to stay there. And if it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't. And there's nothing anyone can do about it.
Hopefully it works.
Yeah. Well, that's why they're delaying it. They want to make sure that it works. They only get one shot at it.
Yep.
You know?
Okay.
All right. Let me think. Next slide, please. Okay. So what you're seeing in this picture, the planet in front is Uranus. And basically what they were discovering was that Uranus's orbit was not behaving the way it was supposed to be behaving. They were running all the tables. They were running all, and there was this error that kept on occurring on a regular basis. And they realized, or at least they suspected, that there had to have been another planet out there beyond Uranus that was tugging on it and causing it to slow down periodically and then speed up again. And the guy who ultimately figured this out, so let me just check to see what the was a guy called Urbain Le Verrier, and I don't have a picture of him listed here, but that's okay. There aren't very many good pictures of him. Urbain Le Verrier was a he was another wunderkind astronomer, and he was able. He sat down in 1846. He wrote, I think it was 10,000 pages of handwritten notes, working out the calculations and plotting the position of this phantom planet. And he was the first person to ever do this. No one had ever done this before. There was another guy called John Couch Adams in England who was trying to do the same thing, but he basically failed. For a long time, there was a huge credit controversy about who had discovered Neptune, but recently they've discovered a lot of historical information that have basically shown that if John Couch Adams may have been trying to find Neptune, but he didn't manage it. But Urbain Le Verrier got it to within like half a degree. He was able to predict the position of this new planet to within half a degree of its actual location. And that night, after he worked out, he said, "This is where it is." He sent it to the National Observatory in Berlin. Two astronomers ran up to their telescope, and that night they found it. Like within
Wow.
literally within half an hour, just looking at the chart. Nope, that's there. That's a real star. Nope, that's not a star. That's where it is. And Le Verrier became a national hero. Went straight to his head, and he he got a little crazy about finding planets, because it turns out that there is a flaw in the orbit of Mercury as well. Mercury's orbit ticks, kind of like the same way that Uranus's orbit does. And he was determined. He said, "Well, I found this planet. I found this. I calculated this thing. I found this planet. There has to be a planet inside the orbit of Mercury." And he called this planet Vulcan.
By relativity, though?
Yes, it was. But they didn't have relativity until long after Le Verrier was dead. And you have to understand that it's if you don't have a firm scientific foundation to completely overturn, you have a choice. You can say that there's some minor thing like an extra planet tugging at a planet, or you can say that your entire conception of the universe is completely and totally wrong. As it turned out, in that particular case, at that particular time, yes, it turned out at that time that our entire conception of the universe was completely wrong. But if you do that and you're not Albert Einstein, you're a crank. Because only someone like, if you just say, if you see a tiny error, you can say it's a flaw in the telescope. You can say it's human error. You can say that it's that there's another planet out there. But it takes a lot of accumulated evidence to say, no, the universe is wrong. And no one was prepared to do that. In fact, famously, after he discovered Neptune, and he turned his attention to Mercury, Le Verrier said, when someone asked, well, maybe Newton's wrong, he said, "I refuse to allow that possibility." He literally, he said, "I refuse to allow it." Like, no one is allowed to talk about it.
Well, Newton was wrong, sort of. Yeah. He wasn't wrong. I just think he was incomplete. I wouldn't say Newton was wrong.
Well, it's an interesting question. I mean, it's one of those questions. Is the job of science to what's called save appearances? In other words, do you just need to come up with a math that works, that answers the phenomena that you observe? Or
for me, I think science. Well, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I said, or is the job of science to actually or is the job of the science to come up with the final truth about the world and to come up with an answer that is explains the universe? Some say
I just think it has to work.
Yeah, and that's true. I mean, that it's kind of interesting when you look at Ptolemy, Claudius Ptolemy, the great ancient Greek astronomer. He did that. Aristotle said that the universe was this collection of crystal spheres that all fit snugly into one another, and the Earth was in the middle. And Ptolemy was like, you know what? I don't care. I don't care if there are crystal spheres or not. I'm just going to create a system that works. And I don't care if they fit into. I don't care if they fit in together. I don't care if I'm just going to treat every single one individually, and I don't care, what kind of system you think you can make with it. This is what the math says. This is what the observations say. This is what I'm going with, and that's kind of what modern science does today. Which I have to say, to a certain extent, I'm a little cheesed off about, because I do like the idea of absolute truth, that somewhere out there we'll finally understand how the universe works.
Yeah,
Maybe
I don't
we will
think you
someday.
reach that. Yeah, I don't think you reach that. And most people I talk to tend to go to scientific instrumentalism over scientific realism.
Yeah,
because it's like you said, there's
Well,
really no way to determine if scientific realism is actually what we're actually showing for a particular theory.
Mm-hmm. I mean, and the funny thing is, even though Einstein's vision of the universe feels more real in some ways than Newton's, because Newton's is basically just math, but Einstein's actually has things like four-dimensional geography and things like that. It feels real, feels more real. It could be just as artificial as Newton's. We don't know. The real version of the universe may be nothing like that. We're just, it's kind of like an act of faith in some ways. Let's see, where was I? All right, next slide, please.
Percival.
Yes, this is Percival Lowell. Yes, a remarkable man in many ways. Although remarkable doesn't necessarily mean good. It means you can remark about him, and you can definitely remark about this guy. Percival Lowell was a very rich man. He was born into very, 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 very high wealth. He was not a very, I would say, mentally stable person. I think very likely he had some form of bipolar disorder. He was given to periods of depression, and he would go into these periods of depression, and sometimes he would not come out for 4 years. Like, he would lock himself in his room and not come out for 4 years. But at the same time, if you read a lot of his writings, he gets extremely obsessed with the sorts of things that he's into. He had a massive, massive ego, and that's always been, I think, his ultimate downfall as a human being and as a scientist. He wasn't a very good scientist. In fact, he didn't like science. He was determined to prove himself right, and he didn't care if he was wrong. You see what I mean? He was more interested in proving himself correct than in actually finding out what was really going on.
We deal with a lot of people like that.
Built. Yeah, there are, but most of them can't build their own observatories, and he did.
Very valid point.
And he and he hired what actually turned out to be some very, very, very talented astronomers to work for him, and that was lucky because they eventually ended up saving the observatory after he died. But next slide, please. He believed that he could see these little straight lines all over the surface of Mars. And he believed, he wasn't the only person who believed this at the time, but he was definitely the #1 pusher of this idea that these were canals, as in artificial canals, built by Martians.
Makes sense.
And he had this whole philosophy. He'd worked out the Martians. He'd sussed them out. He completely sussed them out because he knew that you couldn't possibly build these incredible world-spanning structures if you had war. I mean, how could you have a war on a planet where everyone needed water, right? So it had to be a world of peace. And so he said we should all be like the Martians. We should all embrace peace and forego war and live as one planet. And I have to say, I like that idea that we should all live like Martians. And I often say that if it wasn't for the Martians, there would have been no debate about Pluto. Because if the Martians had actually existed, then Pluto, then Percival Lowell would never have gone looking for Planet X to prove to improve his reputation. If the Martians had actually existed, then Percival Lowell would have been the ambassador to Mars. He never would have gone looking for Planet X, and he never and Lowell's observatory would probably never have found Pluto, and probably not called it a planet either. But Percival Lowell was determined to bulk up his reputation, because let's not put too fine a point on it. If you go out and start telling the world that there are Martians, the rest of the scientific community starts to look at you a little askance. And they were actually getting kind of fed up with him, because they were like, other people aren't seeing these canals, Percy. Are you sure that you're actually seeing something? And and even if you are, is it really wise to start second guessing Martians at this point? And he went and he was spreading. He was selling out packed crowds to talk about his Martians, and the American astronomical community was just getting fed up with this guy. They couldn't really do anything about it. And but he was determined. He didn't just want to be this great popular speaker. He wanted to be a respected scientist. He knew how he was going to do it. He was going to find Planet X. And Planet X, he didn't actually come up with the term Planet X, but Planet X was this idea that had been circulating since Neptune was discovered, because once you factor in Neptune's orbit, the tiny, tiny sliver of error still remained in Uranus's orbit. And it's like, when I say sliver, I mean like the width of a hair at arm's length, that much.
So were these canals kind of similar for the day? Were these canals very similar to what we have in like the 70s and 80s with Richard C. Hoagland and the whole pyramids and Sardonia and the face on Mars? Is that same kind of effect that's going on? Because he was making money off that hand over fist, and even after they demonstrated it was not a real face, he still continued on the Enterprise mission to promote that bogus narrative. Is this something along those lines?
Well, a lot of people have compared him to Hoagland. Certainly, a lot of people that I circulate with. I'm willing to give him a bit more rope in some ways, because scientific knowledge then was not what it is now. Even though, and I was actually quite surprised to learn this when I was doing my research, he really was not believed. I thought that maybe his idea, because actually there's a paper in Nature from 1894 that actually takes Martians for granted, and I assumed that was people generally were pretty open to the idea of Martians, but no, I mean, Percival Lowell was very heavily criticized by a lot of people for his ideas. And he wasn't a proper scientist. He didn't have a degree in astronomy, and scientists were getting kind of fed up with him after a while. And he kind of bet the farm on finding this additional planet, Planet X, and he never did, because he died. Apparently, at one point, he erupted in anger at a servant and went into apoplexy and died. And then his wife.
Didn't he have? Wasn't he the guy that helped quelled sort of the hysteria that stemmed around the possibility that he would fly through?
Yeah, that was Camille Flammarion who started that hysteria. Camille Flammarion was kind of like France's version of Percival Lowell, except he accomplished a lot more than Percival Lowell did. Camille Flammarion, like Percival Lowell, was a big believer in psychic powers. But he also tended to do the sort of thing that Percival Lowell did, which is to jump to conclusions before he had any actual evidence. And the weird thing is, when he actually started telling everyone that the comet was going to come, because it was known at the time that Earth was going to pass through Halley's Comet's tail. That was predicted, so people started saying, "Oh my God, if we pass through the tail, then the cyanogen in the comet's tail is going to poison the Earth." And so people started selling comet umbrellas and comet pills and comet gas masks. I don't know what an umbrella would do to stop cyanogen gas coming from space, but
bounce the meteors back off, of course.
I think you just gave a bunch of flat earthers some really good ideas to scam more people, because they're going to be like Nibiru protection. Get an umbrella; it'll save you from Nibiru when it comes around.
Oh. People were much better at scamming people in the turn of the century, in the turn of the 20th century. Snake oil. I mean, the term snake oil salesman comes from that era, and they were really good at it. But so, oddly enough, it was Camille Flammarion who first proposed the idea that the canals, the markings on Mars were canals, and it was Percival Lowell who was one of the first people to challenge Camille Flammarion on the idea that Halley's Comet was going to kill everyone. Which shows that he did have some scientific rationality. Well, he wasn't completely out of his mind.
Yeah.
And neither was Camille Flammarion. I mean, he was a pretty decent scientist, probably a better scientist than Lowell was. But ultimately, sorry.
You said he did quite a lot in his time here on Earth.
Yeah, he founded the role. Well, Percival Lowell, yeah. Well, I mean, I don't know how much he did that was actually of value to the human race.
Yeah.
The most important. I mean, he wrote a lot of racist literature about how backward Japan was, and it probably would have continued. But the most important thing he did ultimately was fund the Lowell Observatory. Now, there's a 10-year gap between Lowell's death in 1915 and the resumption of the search for Planet X. And the reason for that was because Lowell's wife, who, if anything, was even crazier than he was determined to get the part of Lowell's will that was earmarked for the observatory for herself. So she basically, and of course, what happens when there's a contested legacy? The lawyers end up getting everything. And and so in the end, the judge found for the observatory, but by that point they had lost over half of their nest egg. But in 1925, they were able to start searching for Planet X again. Next slide, please. And they found this guy to do it for them. This is Clyde Tombaugh, and I don't know about you, but I can't think of a more all-American looking guy than that. He was. I say in my video about him, I say that Horatio Algar and Norman Rockwell, if they worked together, could not come up with a better American life than Clyde Tombaugh's. He was like this sort of archetypal, by your bootstraps American hero. He was a farmer. He made his own telescopes. He manufactured his own telescopes. He played touch football. He built his own basketball court, and he was able to. He became obsessed on his off time when he wasn't loading bales of hay with looking at the planets, and he actually sent some of his sketches to the Lowell Observatory on a complete whim. He had no idea what would be the result, and he got a letter back saying, "How fit are you? Are you willing to work long nights?" And he didn't say anything about Planet X, but they said there's a position for you in Flagstaff, Arizona, if you want it. So he took all the money he had. He bought a ticket to Flagstaff, Arizona, which he'd never been to, and his dad saw him off at the station saying, "Make yourself useful and beware of easy women." and off he went to Flagstaff, and he lived in an unheated room in the Lowell Observatory for the better part of 20 years. And he just sat at this machine, which is called a blink comparator, okay, and looked and flipped and looked and flipped and looked. And the thing about blink comparators is that they create a kind of animation. So if the stars don't move, but planets and asteroids and comets do. And you can see if something's moving if you flip the blink comparator on and off, on and off, on and off. You can get a sense of what's moving. Now, the problem that the Lowell Observatory's astronomers had, which is why they eventually called this guy, this isn't going to work, we'll just hand it to some drudge, is that they couldn't figure out how to tell the difference between a planet X that was very far away and an asteroid that was very close by. Now, what Clyde Tombaugh did that was absolutely brilliant is that he figured out that at the moment of, what's the term? Oh, I've forgotten what it was called. But at the moment when a planet starts to go in, at the moment when a planet starts to go into retrograde, right? When it starts to, when the Earth starts to move away from a planet, starts to leave a planet behind in its orbit, from our perspective, the planet appears to move backwards. And this is called apparent retrograde motion. It's kind of like when you're driving a car and you're passing all the other cars. The cars are going forward, but in your perspective, they're going backwards, right? Well, planets do that too as they race around the solar system. Okay.
Are you talking about when it's at opposition?
Yeah, the opposition point. Thanks. And so at the exact opposition point, right before a planet goes into retrograde, it appears to stand. Sorry, it appears to stand completely still. And because an object stands completely still, you can use direct parallax measurements to tell how far away it is. And so he was able to determine exactly, just from looking at the simple parallax measurements, whether something was a big planet X far away or a little asteroid close by. And it was through that, just focusing constantly on the opposition point, day in, day out, flip after flip after flip. It took him, I think, 3 months and looking at 2 million stars before he finally found this thing that was obviously farther than Neptune and was moving. And he walked into the head of the Lowell Observatory at that time, his office. His name, oddly enough, I can't believe this is his name, was Vesto Melvin Slifer. And he said, "Dr. Slifer, I have found your planet X." And yeah, they verified that it was farther than Neptune. And it was indeed a moving object in our solar system. And what's really sad is that almost immediately they jumped on Percival Lowell, because it turned out that one of Lowell's many predictions for Planet X was 6 degrees away from where Clyde Tombaugh had found what we now call Pluto. So they jumped on that and they said, "Ah, this must be Percival Lowell's Planet X." And they basically sold it as Percival Lowell's planet. Clyde Tombaugh wasn't even mentioned in the circular announcing its discovery.
What?
What? Yeah. Just check that. So where am I? Okay. Oh yeah. Well, actually, I've overstepped myself. If you can switch to the next slide, please.
Oh yes.
That.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that is Clyde Tombaugh's discovery photograph of Pluto, and as you can see, you can barely see it, and this freaked the observatory out because Pluto was not supposed to be like that. It was supposed to be this big giant planet that was pulling the orbit of Uranus. But look at it; it's tiny. It was 6 times dimmer than Lowell had predicted. And so what the Lowell Observatory decided to do was they were thinking, well, is this really Planet X? Have we not found Planet X? And they called in Clyde Tombaugh, and he spent 12 years at the blink comparator simply to verify that Pluto was alone, that there was nothing else out there. And he didn't find anything. He looked through 45 million stars. He found 775 asteroids, but he only found one Pluto. And it's kind of weird. They actually say modern planetary astronomers have calculated that if Maki, the dwarf planet, had been anywhere else than where it was at the time, because it was actually in the Milky Way, if it had been slightly to the left or slightly to the right, he probably would have found Maki as well. And that would have completely overturned the idea of Pluto being Planet X before it had even started. So for a long time, people thought Pluto, yeah, it's one of those weird little things, you know. Mm-hmm. For a long time, people just assumed that Pluto was Planet X. And this went on for many decades until, if you can flip the slides, this happened. There was a young astronomer working at the U.S. Naval Observatory, which is America's equivalent to the Royal Greenwich Observatory, and he received an image of Pluto that was marked defective, and he was asked to double check it. And he noticed that the defect did not appear to be in the photograph itself, because all the stars were fine. It was just this little lump on Pluto that was there. And then he checked another photograph, and he saw that the lump was in a different location. So if it was a defect, it appeared to be orbiting Pluto. And it turned out that, yes, Pluto had a moon. Now, there's a wonderful thing you can do with moons that Isaac Newton showed. If you can measure the orbit of a moon, the speed of the orbit, and the angle of the orbit of a moon, you can figure out how big the object it's orbiting is. And this was a gold mine for people who wanted to know about Pluto, because nobody had ever been able to accurately ascertain its mass before. And when they did, they discovered that Pluto was tiny. Now, I think most people know that Pluto is tiny, but I don't think they know how tiny it really is. Pluto is smaller than our moon. It is 1/500th the mass of the Earth. It is 1/6 the mass of the moon. It is tiny. And it really is remarkable when you think about it that Clyde Tombaugh was able to see it. But he was. And the thing is, Clyde Tombaugh didn't know at the time, but he had exceptional visual acuity, like supernatural levels of visual acuity. Other astronomers would come up to this guy who didn't even have an astronomy degree and say, yeah, look, it's there at 14th magnitude. So you saw that at 14th magnitude? Oh, yeah, sure. What, you didn't? You know?
That's wild.
So basically, what happened after that was, well, Planet X, it had to still be there. Because Pluto couldn't have been Planet X. And for about 10 years, there was this period of Planet X fever. And this is where Nibiru comes in. I don't actually have a slide for this, but one of the big Nibiru claims is that in 1983, there was an infrared astronomy satellite called IRAS that supposedly found a planet the size of Jupiter within our solar system. What had actually happened was that was a possible answer to one of the questions that they had found. They didn't actually say that that's what it was, only that it was possible. And then later on, they ruled it out. But because that was published in a newspaper, as happened with Roswell, all you need is one newspaper headline, and the next thing you have an endless conspiracy that goes on forever.
Right. It still hasn't ended.
Next slide. Sorry?
And still hasn't ended. Still a thing.
No, it'll never end at this point. I mean, think about it. How long have we been predicting the Book of Revelation? That was supposed to happen in the life. That was supposed to happen in the lifetime of the apostles. Excuse me.
Weren't the full preterists say that it already did? I think full preterism. Don't they say that everything was done in Peter's lifetime or within the first century?
Well, then I must have missed something in history class.
Some people say that Jesus came and we just missed it, but I think that would have been a bigger fanfare than.
Yeah, the New York Times would have at least wrote about that. I think that would be in the
Fox
headlines
News would have
back
gotten
then.
it wrong, but
Definitely.
sorry. I like Fox News. I'm sorry, but I could diss on them, I guess.
I don't. I
find
they do get some things wrong. I gotta admit, but that's a different topic.
I mean,
They suck.
their men are obnoxious and their women are creepy because they all look exactly the same, and it's weird.
I like blondes.
What?
I like blondes. They're all the same.
It turns out, they often say the reason why all the Fox News women look the same is because Roger Ailes, actually the old head of Fox News, had a criterion that he wanted. If he didn't want to have sex with them, he wouldn't hire them. So they have to be sexual.
That's the grossest thing I've ever imagined in my life. Roger Ailes dry humping something. God.
Stop.
Yeah.
I need a shower now.
No, no. 2 words: Harvey Weinstein.
Still don't know if he's worse than Roger Ailes, but it's a close race. I'll tell you that. It's a close race there.
Yeah. Neither one I really want to envision right now. So let's get back to planets.
Yeah, back to space.
Okay, let's not get too off track. So anyway, this is Voyager 2. Voyager 2 is the only spacecraft we've ever sent to Uranus and Neptune. And when it reached Neptune in 1989, which is the last planet on its tour, like I said, because it was flying by Neptune, we were able to use the tug, Neptune's tug on it, to get the first ever truly accurate measurement of Neptune's mass. And it turned out that it was 0.6% lighter than we had always thought. Now, 0.6% may not seem like a lot, but when you're talking about an object the size of Neptune, that's the equivalent of reaching down into its atmosphere and pulling out a planet the size of Mars. And it just so happens, that Planet X, according to the current calculations, was about the size of Mars. So it turned out that Planet X had always been there. It had just been an error in Neptune's mass. That miscalculation of Neptune's mass, that was Planet X. And after that calculation was corrected, Planet X disappeared. And most astronomers who aren't completely out of their minds consider that to be the death knell of Planet X. And so the reason that I have to talk about this is because you have to get an idea. This is covering ground for what's going to happen later, because many of the same techniques that were used to find Neptune and were used to try and find Planet X are going to be talked about when we talk about Planet 9. But the fact is, Planet 9 isn't actually an extension of Planet X. It is based on a completely different data set. It's not the same thing. But in order to talk about Planet 9, if you could swap slides, please. I have to talk. Oh, did I miss one? There should be one before that. Yeah, there we go. I have to talk about this. And this is the Kuiper belt. Now, do you have a cursor?
He does.
Yeah. Oh, well, all right. Well, you see that if you, okay, let me try and do this verbally. You see that little dot that's kind of hanging off on the left-hand side next to the big gap in this in the bottom part of it on the left? There's like a little dot right in the front that's kind of like a curve.
Yes.
I'm not doing this very well. That little dot is Pluto. And
oh wow.
Yeah. That's Pluto. And you can tell it's Pluto because there's a whole line of other ones behind it where New Horizons was looking for the next trip, next target.
Huh.
And it was In 1992, a guy called David Jewett discovered the first ever object in the same orbital plane, in the same orbital region as Pluto. And then after he discovered it, he proved that there was more to find, and then they kept finding more. And now there are over 1,500 that have names. There are tens of thousands that don't have names, that haven't had their orbits completely plotted. There's something like a tenth the mass of the Earth sitting in this region. And some of them are almost as big as Pluto. Some of them are bigger than Pluto. And this is what triggered the whole debate about whether Pluto should be a planet or whether it should be just lumped together with its fellow Kuiper belt objects. And in the end, you probably know that Pluto was demoted. Excuse me.
Poor Pluto.
Pluto. Yeah, poor Pluto. But at the same time, I think it kind of makes sense when you look at where Pluto is, and when you look at the rest of the Kuiper belt, it makes a certain amount of sense that that's what happened. Now, okay, so if you could swap slides, please. Okay, this is the Kuiper belt, and as you can see, it's not a random hodgepodge swarm of objects. It has its own various regions, and if you look at the front, you'll see a thick red line with Pluto in it. Right, those are called the Plutinos, and they are the swarm of Kuiper belt objects that occupies Pluto's orbit. Now, if you go left. Yeah, see that big red line with Pluto in it? Can you see Pluto? Or is it too high, too low res?
Yes.
Okay.
I can see it. I can see it.
Yeah. Well, those are called the Plutinos, and they actually exist in what's called a safe resonance. Neptune sculpts the Kuiper belt with its gravity, and there are certain regions, and if you look, you can see one right in front of Pluto and right behind it. There's this gap, like a vinyl record, and those are areas that Neptune has cleared with its gravity because they're in what is called a resonance, and a resonance is an exact ratio of orbits. So if that region of the Kuiper belt is, I think, the 3 to 4 resonance, and it means that objects in that region orbit 3 times every 4 times Neptune orbits. And when that happens, it's like pushing someone on a swing at just the right moment to make them go higher. It knocks the object out, and so you end up with these gaps, these dead zones at the regions where the resonance occur. But weirdly, the opposite can also happen, because if you look, the Plutinos are in a 2-3 resonance with Neptune. In fact, Pluto is in a 2-3 resonance, as is Orcus and the other Plutinos. But because they're in a 2-3 resonance, that means every time they make 1 orbit around the sun, Neptune makes 1.5 orbits around the sun, which means that Neptune is always half an orbit away whenever they intersect. So they never actually come into contact. So this safe resonance is what keeps Pluto from getting kicked out of the solar system. The blue area is called the classical belt, and it's basically what you'd imagine when you think of the Kuiper belt. It's a swarm of a river of icy objects, like a flowing around in a circle. And the first one to be found in 1992 was called 1992 QB1, and because of that, the classical Kuiper belt objects are called QB10s. Although I don't think people use that term very often anymore. All right, this next region here. Stop. Go back a little. Go back. Go back to the left a little bit, please. Can you move Eris in? Yeah, okay. The next region, the gray area, is called the scattered objects. Now, these are objects that have been captured by Neptune and thrown into wild, crazy orbits. Some of them are hundreds of AU, some of them are thousands of AU. But the key thing about scattered objects is that they all have the same closest distance to the sun, the so-called perihelion. Okay, the closest distance to the sun is within 30 and 40 AU. Neptune is at 30 AU. So if it's within 30 to 40 AU, then that means it's close enough to Neptune that Neptune could have knocked it out. And Eris, of course, the famous Pluto-killing object, is a member of this group. Let me just check what the next slide is. Okay, well, yeah, just move the next slide, and we'll just keep talking. Zoom out a little, please. Okay, see, these are the different resonances. You've got the 2-5, which is a safe resonance. You've got the 3-4, the 3-5, the 4-7. These are gaps, and then you've got the 2-3, which is where Pluto is. Okay, and the 1-2. These are called the two Tinos. That are in the 1-2 resonance. There aren't that many there.
Good Lord. Good Lord.
Well, you know, astronomers have a sense of humor. What are you going to do? Now, next slide, please. This is the object that kicked off the fuss. This was discovered in 2003 by the same guy who discovered Eris. His name is Michael Brown. And initially, it was placed in the scattered objects, and I think it still is. I think it still is technically listed as a scattered object according to the IAU. But as you can see, unlike a scattered object, which has a perihelion of 30 to 40 AU, that's Pluto. You can zoom in a little bit around Pluto. Pluto has an orbit of 35 AU. Sorry, can you move it a little? And Pluto has an orbit of 30. Can you move it so that Pluto's on the screen, please?
It's at the top right.
There.
There you top right. There you
go. Yeah. So Pluto has an orbit of 35 AU. Sedna doesn't come anywhere near it. Sedna is not a part of the Kuiper belt. It's a completely separate object. And it has an orbit of 11,500 years, but that's not in itself all that impressive. Comets can have orbits of hundreds of thousands of years. But there was no way that anyone could explain where Sedna could have come from. As far as they understood, Sedna should not exist. And that was, according to Mike Brown, and I happen to agree with him. I mean, this is the guy who discovered Eris. He said that Sedna is the most important trans-Neptunian object found to date, including Pluto, because there is just no way to explain it according to current models. And if we ever can explain it, then we will certainly learn something very fundamental about our solar system.
It could have been a captured object?
It's been suggested that that's possible. I don't know if any models have ever been run about it being a captured object. The going hypothesis that Mike Brown initially proposed was that it had been tugged into its current orbit by a star in the sun's birth cluster. When the sun was born, all stars are born in clusters. And when our sun was born, it would have been surrounded by a whole bunch of other stars. And it's possible that Sedna could have been pulled into its orbit by one of those stars. In fact, it was actually done by a guy named Julio Fernandez, who was the first person to propose the Kuiper belt. And he ran a simulation, and he found that that was at least possible. Let me just make sure. Yeah. So yeah, can you? Sorry, what?
How is it able to go out so far? You know, if the other planets aren't, why is this one being, tugged out so deep into space?
Well, that's the question that people are trying to figure out. Sedna's orbit. I mean, there are comets that have orbits. Comet West famously had a 100,000-year orbit, but so Sedna's giant orbit isn't all that world-shattering. What could possibly have put it in this particular orbit where it doesn't seem like it's being affected by anything lower in has been driving people nuts. And if you can just flip the slide. I think I may have overstepped another slide. You just flip the slide, please. The other way. And again, please. Yeah, I've already talked about these are the in 2012. In 2012, finally, they found another Sedna. It doesn't have a name. It's known as Biden because its provisional number is 2012 VP 113. So it's VP Biden. And the weird thing is that both Sedna and Biden have relatively the same perihelion. Sedna's perihelion is 76 AU. Biden's perihelion is 80 AU. And we don't know why. So, but what they did notice, and what was immediately latched onto by the discoverers of Biden, was that both Sedna and Biden not only had very similar orbits. Just next slide, please. They also shared something called the argument of perihelion. Now, the perihelion, which is at the top of the vertical axis there, is the shortest distance between the object and the sun, and the argument of perihelion is the angle between the shortest distance from the sun and what's called the ascending node, which is the green arrow at the bottom, which is the point at which its orbit intersects with the plane of the solar system. Just check. When Mike Brown started to become interested in this, he contacted a recently frocked professor named Konstantin Batygin. If you could switch the slides, please. Konstantin Batygin is a mathematical genius who actually became a professor at 28 years old, and that's unheard of in science. But he was able to run some really complex numbers, and he discovered that not only did Sedna and Biden have this argument of perihelion similarity, but so did a whole bunch of other large orbited objects. And not only that, but they were all their orbits were all pointing in the same direction. And he said that the chances of that happening at random are 0.007%. So it seemed that there was something going on that was corralling those objects into that set of orbits. And Brown and Batygin proposed that the only real option was this idea of Planet 9, and the orbit of Planet 9 is there in orange. Sorry. But the weird thing is, when they ran simulations, they discovered that Planet 9 wasn't pulling the orbits. In fact, its orbit was in the opposite direction to the comets. The only way that Planet 9 made sense was that it was pulling those objects, but that it was keeping those objects safe in a similar way to the way that Neptune and Pluto are in a safe resonance. These objects would have to be in a similar safe resonance. If I can have the next slide, please. Oh, I suppose I can talk about this. The simulations that were run suggested that Planet 9 would be about between 10 and 20 times the mass of the Earth, which is about the mass of Uranus and Neptune. Uranus is 14 Earth masses and Neptune is 17 Earth masses. So it seemed very likely to Brown and Batygin that Planet 9 was similar in look to Uranus and Neptune. And they actually put out a picture of Planet 9 looking like Neptune, which Wikipedia dutifully copied, and this is their free-to-use version of it. Next slide, please. One thing that the simulations constantly threw up at them, which initially they thought, this is it, this couldn't possibly be true, is that whenever they ran the simulations, there was a collection of what Brown called the wings, which you can see the turquoise objects here, turquoise orbits, that were off to the side at right angles to the orbits of the shepherded objects, but they were also vertical. They were at a 90-degree angle to the ecliptic. There's no such thing. There's no such thing as a vertically orbiting object. There's no such thing. But then they went and looked, and there are objects in those orbits, and that blew their minds because they did not expect that their Planet 9 would make a successful prediction, and yet it did. Another successful prediction that it made was that it explained something that no one had ever been able to explain before, which is the obliquity of the solar system. The solar system is tilted in respect to the sun by about 6 degrees. And there's no reason why it should be. It just is. But the gravity of Planet 9 could explain it. And it could also explain Sedna and Biden. When they ran the simulations over thousands of years, they discovered that some Kuiper belt objects were pulled by Planet 9 into these million-year cycles of going out of the solar system and then going back in, going out, going back in. So if you were willing to wait about 30 million years, Sedna would become an ordinary member of the Kuiper belt again, at least according to their hypothesis. Where am I? Let's see. Next slide, please. Where did Planet 9 come from? I mean, it's like I said, it's not enough to just conjure up a planet. You have to offer an explanation as to where it came from. And it just so happens that an explanation was provided, albeit before Planet 9 had ever been proposed. And the explanation is called the Nice model. And the Nice model is this incredibly weird model of solar system formation that was proposed in the Italian, no, it's French. Is it French? Yeah, Nice is in France. The French city of Nice. Basically, it imagined that the solar system essentially played pinball for the first couple million years of its formation. Originally, the solar system was a lot smaller than it is, and the Kuiper belt was a lot bigger than it is now. And Uranus and Neptune were actually in opposite places. So Uranus was the farther planet, Neptune was the inner planet, and they were Uranus then is where Uranus is now, and the Kuiper belt came in a lot closer. And what they think happened was that initially they thought that it was a very gradual process, that over time, objects from the Kuiper belt would get kicked into the inner solar system by the outer planets, and then over time, the gravitational effects would build up and build up and build up and build up until Jupiter started to move inward and Saturn started to move outward, and eventually they fell into a 1-2 resonance, which again, like Neptune and the Kuiper belt, sent the ice giants, the Uranus and Neptune, spiraling out into the Kuiper belt. And this, they believe, created what is called the late heavy bombardment. And the late heavy bombardment was this period in the solar system's history where a swarm of meteorite impacts slammed over every planet in the solar system that we know of. And the problem with this idea was that it was too gradual. It left too if Jupiter moved too slowly, it had time to affect Mars and send Mars spiraling into the sun or crashing into Earth. So they said, well, let's let's rerun the model, but instead of having objects in the Kuiper belt do it, let's add another planet. Let's add another ice giant and have that ice giant be the trigger that sends Jupiter into its forward push and triggers the late heavy bombardment. When you do that, you run the system, you run the simulations. Mars is okay, Earth is okay, everything's fine. The question is, what happened to that ice giant? Jupiter would have kicked it out into the outer edge of the solar system, but when the people who formulated the NICE model didn't really give a thought about where it could be now. So Mike Brown actually said, if it's out there, it's probably that ice. It's probably that missing ice giant, the one that triggered the NICE model. Oh, where am I?
Fascinating.
Okay.
Fascinating.
Is it? I'm not sure. I think I'm droning a little bit.
Yeah. No, you have everybody in the live chat is going crazy about how interesting this is and how much they love it. So you're doing fantastic.
Okay. Well, that's good to know. Next slide, please. So, whether Planet 9 exists or not, and Mike Brown is pretty much willing to stake his reputation at this point that it does. I mean, it explains so much. I should point out that there are alternate hypotheses. The reason I haven't gone into them is because they are really complicated and they involve like high-end level celestial mechanics. There's this another wunderkind named Anne-Marie Madigan. I highly recommend, if you really want to get into it and you can stomach the numbers, looking at her alternate hypothesis, which is basically that the gravity of the Kuiper belt itself is responsible for all the effects that I've seen. But the thing is, Planet 9 explains more things than just that. So, and in fact, the more we look at Planet 9, the more it seems to explain. So it is kind of strange. Now, this little plot here has nothing to do with Planet 9, actually. It's called, this is, what you're seeing there is the number of Kuiper belt objects in a particular part of the Kuiper belt. So you see it spikes right there in the middle of the classical belt. And you've got the other spike in the red zone, which is where Pluto is, the Plutinos. But if you notice, there's pretty much nothing beyond 50 AU. It just peters out, right? That shouldn't happen. There's absolutely nothing in the simulations or in the predictions that says that should be the case. There should not be this sudden drop-off of Kuiper belt objects. This is called the Kuiper cliff, and it's been known for a long time, and nobody knows why it's there. However, what's interesting is that until 2012, there was only one object with a perihelion beyond the Kuiper cliff, and that was Sedna. But Biden has a very similar perihelion to Sedna, and when you plot both Sedna and Biden, you realize that this Kuiper cliff is looking a lot like a gap, like a cleared neighborhood, perhaps. And there have been a lot of speculations that this so-called Planet 10, and that's what they're calling it Planet 10, even though technically it would be the 9th planet because it would be way further in than Planet 9, might actually be out there as well. So even if Planet 9 does not exist, and I'm not enough of an authority on the subject to say one way or the other whether it does, never ever underestimate the solar system. If you do, you're going to end up looking very silly in a few decades. That's just the way the solar system works.
Safe advice.
That's pretty much it. I think that's pretty much all I can say. Is that too short?
Excellent. Are you okay? So what we got now? Actually, I'm getting questions. Steve, be looking over the live chat if we have any questions or if we have any super chats. But I have a little bit of a surprise for you, Nick. There is a guy that is he's a friend of the show. He's comes into some of our after shows and he talks with us from time to time. But he is a huge fan of yours, and he wanted the opportunity to come in and say hello and maybe ask you a couple questions and let you know how much he appreciates what you do. So Dave, I believe, is getting Puff the link, and he'll let us know when he actually comes in. So while we wait on him, Steve, do you want to? Okay, cool. So go ahead, Puff.
Yeah, like, okay, so I've been hunting down to get you on the show for quite a long time because they have different people, you know, come on and stuff like that. But like, I think it was like, to me, it was pretty artful how like you covered like even flat Earth, but like in 5 episodes you put it to bed. Like you're like, let's wrap this up, get it over with. But sometimes like some things come through in the way you like talk about stuff, like the way you talk about, like when you brought up Leverrier, you kind of skipped over him. Like you're like, he kind of got a hold of himself. But like the way you talked about how he tried to name Jupiter after himself, and you know, things like that.
Well, he tried to name,
like you can hear in your tone, Neptune. Sorry, yeah, you can hear in your tone that you're like, this guy. And I was like, well, one thing I did want to ask: is it true that he really like ordered like this the half-built model of the steam engine to be destroyed?
That wasn't Leverrier. That was George Biddle Airy, who was the British version of Leverrier. He was the head of the Royal Greenwich Observatory, and he was a man of very little imagination. And actually, it's quite funny.
He's the one that
I don't know if you've ever
looking for planets, right?
What? Sorry.
He got on people for looking for planets in their free time.
Yeah. Even if they were doing it in their spare time, he would stop them from looking for them, just because he felt it was a waste of time on an existential level. Like it didn't matter that they weren't actually wasting time. It was just he didn't like the idea of looking for planets anyway. Don't do it. On his don't pollute his world with the idea of looking for planets. I don't know if any of you have ever watched Fairly Odd Parents.
Yes, absolutely.
Anyway, there are these characters called the Pixies. One of them is voiced by Ben Stein. You know, he sounds like this, and he's really boring. And I actually use that picture as a representative of Biddle Airy, because you cannot comprehend how insane this guy was when it came to being boring. He signed, dated, and filed his ink blots. If there were empty boxes in the observatory, he would mark them as empty, and he would do this for hours. He would go, empty, empty, empty. So
that's a disorder.
He had absolutely no interest in anything that was beyond any. And this guy, I don't know if you've ever heard of Charles Babbage.
I've only heard of him a couple times. Like
Charles Babbage
in the
is kind of
videos you do, but nobody else brings it up because like no other historian of astronomy covers the interpersonal like feuds and the relationships. And like when you brought up the scandalous rumor that guy did not get the news to verify a planet was there, or sorry, a moon was there because his maid didn't pick up the mail. Even though you were like, yeah, it's just a rumor, but still you bring stuff up that like nobody else would ever bring up, you know? Like you humanize people in such a way that they could never be like doing this for any other purpose. It's just what they do.
Puff's fanboying out hard over here, isn't he?
Yeah, that's the thing. Scientists are interesting people. They are often portrayed as being exceptionally boring. But you can't be boring and a scientist. It's impossible because being a scientist means you are putting your brain through a very strange set of exercises, and no scientist is going to come out normal. And you can't really become a scientist and be normal. So scientists are always really fascinating people. They're always and if you want to strike up a conversation with a scientist, just email them. They're really open and they love to answer questions. But scientists are always really fascinating people. They're either completely screwed up or they're just totally in love with what they do. And sometimes both. But the thing about Charles Babbage was, he's kind of a folk hero in cyberpunk literature. I think William Gibson actually wrote a fantasy book about him. But he was in the 1850s, he actually developed, he designed and almost built the first ever programmable computer. And it was made of clockwork and it was steam powered. And if he managed to get it built, then the computer age would have happened in the Victorian age. And the British Empire would have reigned eternal, because there would have been no way you could have fired a weapon at any British tank, because they would have been able to calculate exactly when the weapon was going to hit before the weapon actually hit the ground. So it's very likely that if the difference engine, as he called it, had ever been built, there never would have been a World War I. There never would have been a World War II. There never would have, and the whole history of the world would be completely different now. Charles and George Airy was like, nope, that's just stupid, and he had the whole thing.
Yeah, he was like, that is far too interesting. Can't have that going on. Because like you were talking about the Nice models, and like Triton kind of backs up the Nice model, right? Because it doesn't belong where it's at, right? It seems more like a captured object. Because I know NASA, they're planning a mission to go investigate that, but I don't know if it's actually going to go through or not.
Yeah, it's a difficult question, because as far as NASA's been moving kind of in waves, right? They've done orbiters for every single one of the planets except for Uranus and Neptune. So it's like, do they focus on Neptune, which is the more interesting planet, or do they do Uranus first? And they've got a whole priority right now. The one thing everyone wants to know, the one thing everyone is desperate to know is there an ocean on Europa? And that's the next phase of exploration they're going to do. They're going to actually map Europa's ocean if it has one. And the whole thing is like, we want to be able to send a probe to Europa, into the ocean in our lifetime, and that's what we want to focus on right now. So pretty much everything else is kind of been put on the back burner, and I kind of understand, because I want to see the ocean too.
Well, of course, everybody wants some proof of alien life, you know. Hopefully.
Yeah. Hopefully. But yeah, Triton. Well, everyone knew that Triton was a captured object, because it orbited Neptune in the wrong direction, and also all of Neptune's other moons are just pulverized lumps of rubble. So it was quite clear that something had come plowing in and destroyed all the earlier moons, and that was obviously Triton. The problem was nobody could figure out where it came from, and it wasn't when the Kuiper belt showed up. It was like, oh, okay, that's where it came from. But Triton is actually larger than any of the Kuiper belt's objects we found so far. So it's quite clear that very likely when Neptune plowed into the Kuiper belt had a lot more larger objects in it than it does now. The Nice model is only one way to explain that. I'm still not sold entirely on the Nice model. I'm not 100% sure if the Nice model is the be all and end all. But it's
because there's also like the jumping Jupiter model and stuff like that too, right?
Well, the jumping Jupiter model is just a variation on the Nice model.
Okay,
it's what I was talking about.
Was encompassed in it, because but the jumping Jupiter model is to me just seems much less probable. Like,
we do got a couple questions in the live chat.
Well, actually,
how did we end up in the right spot? Stuff didn't get swallowed up. Like, it just doesn't seem right.
Well, the jumping Jupiter model is actually what opened the door for Planet 9, because it was the extra ice giant in the jumping Jupiter model that allowed people to say, well, maybe that was Planet 9. We don't know.
Let's get a couple questions in, because we only got about 10 minutes left. So let's kind of wrap this up. And it's okay, it's fine. But I want to make sure we get some questions in, because people were asking some questions. Real quick, Trevor wants to know: are there any future observations expected from the James Webb's telescope that will add any data to further resolve any unknown hypotheses out there?
That's a pretty broad question. I think that the James Webb Space Telescope is primarily interested in looking deep down. It's at really low wavelength light toward the beginning of the universe. It's going to see farther than Hubble. So yeah, I mean, it's going to be able to push through the barrier that Hubble reached, and hopefully see more. But it's also going to be looking for things like extrasolar planets. And if there is a Planet 9 out there, it might find it. But that's not. If there is a Planet 9, it's probably going to be a much more conventional workhorse type telescope that finds it, that can spend more time looking for it. Everyone's going to want a piece of the James Webb, so it's going to be it's not going to have a lot of time on any one project.
Thrift store Dan, $5 super chat. Kyle's hair is on fleek today. Is it on fleek or just fleek? I think it's just fleek. Wouldn't it be Kyle's hair is just?
No, it's on fleek.
Kyle's hair is fleek? It's on fleek,
On
really?
fleek is the right
That's
wordage.
stupid.
Yeah.
We need to fix that. That doesn't sound right.
Thank you, by the way. Thank you.
It's just be Kyle's hair is fleek. I don't know. I don't like that on fleek. Makes no sense to me.
Well,
And I'm not a millennial, so I don't get any shit.
No, it's certain things like, you know, I don't know how Snapchat works.
I don't.
You don't.
use Snapchat
Don't.
either.
You don't want to. You don't want to. Don't go there. It's. I could go on and on about Snapchat for I don't know.
Don't worry, I had no idea what the hell fleek meant either.
It serves a good purpose, but I'm just going to shut up about it. I'm not going to go into my Snapchat rant. Go ahead, Steve.
Right?
Yeah,
So
when it comes to millennial stuff, I'm the first person. Yeah, we got one more. When it comes to millennial shit, I am the first person to go, I have no idea what the hell you're talking about. I just don't know the terminology. I'm not woke enough to know millennial chat. Chuck Dustin, $2. Nick, I must know, what is your favorite color?
Blue, but that's a bit narcissistic because it happens to be the color of my eyes.
Colors don't exist, or it really doesn't matter.
Well, they do. They do exist.
Don't get me triggered. Don't get me triggered.
Steve.
You wouldn't like me when I'm triggered.
ParallaxNick,
I like this guy.
we're going to have you back on, I think, for another space talk because people absolutely loved you tonight.
Oh, well, thank you.
Glowing reviews in the live chat. So excellent.
Thank you.
Job.
I would love to.
And Puff.
I would absolutely. Yeah.
Good. We'd love to have you. We'll definitely make that happen. And Puff, I'm sorry that I forgot about you at the beginning.
No problem, man.
I'm glad you messaged me and reminded me, and we were able to bring you in because I completely forgot about you talking to me a couple weeks ago. Because it's been like what, 2 weeks since we last talked about this, I think.
I think it was like just about 7 days, 8 days, man, 8 days. But you know, probably been a lot of gummy bears and cookies.
My brain's not good after like 2.
That's the thing about living in Europe. You get really good gummy bears.
Yep.
Oh, I don't think you get gummy bears like Kyle does.
Oh man, Nate,
those gummy bears will shut down your afternoon.
ParallaxNick, is there anything that you want to say to wrap up tonight? Let everybody know where they can find you once again, your channel name, and
well, I'm ParallaxNick on YouTube. I'm Nick R. Webb on Twitter, and I'm Nicholas Webb on Facebook. I think that covers it. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, we thank you so much for. We got one more super chat come in. Landon and Nick talk when teach us everything. Oh, we could do that. Yeah, Landon and Nick would be a really good combo to put together.
Who is Landon? Just so I know.
Landon Curtinall. He studies Vulcanoid asteroids. He's a computer scientist, astronomer, and mathematician.
He's actually looking for them, or is he just modeling them?
I think he does the searching, but I think he does some modeling as well. He literally helped develop the internet. You guys wouldn't be on the internet right now if it wasn't for him, I don't think. He helped develop some internet protocols, the hash Fowler, Nolan Fowler something hash. He's discovered 2 prime numbers, Mersenne primes. The guy's smart.
Yeah, smart.
It's not every day you can say you discovered a number.
Nope.
2. Well, I discovered that they're prime.
Yeah.
Why he's a friend of our show, we don't know.
Well, you must be doing something right.
Glad to have him. Yeah, we are glad to have him. He'll actually be on the he'll be coming back here on the September the 17th, I believe, to discuss the volcano that is going off in Hawaii, Kilauea.
Oh,
so that'll be exciting.
That's the thing. It doesn't seem to be stopping. Just
no, it's crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, it's crazy. But yeah, guys, thank you for joining us. ParallaxNick, it's a pleasure to meet you after watching your videos. I like Puff. I've been a huge fan for a long time, and you definitely should keep doing what you're doing because people can learn a lot, I think. Guys, go check out his channel. The link is in the description. He has, if you liked what you saw tonight, it doesn't hold a candle to what he can do in his actual videos when he can go through and, you know, when you're live, the time constraints and all that kind of put a hindrance on how deep he can go into these subjects. But his videos are in depth and detail, and they're made in a way where you can understand them. They're not so much that you get lost in some of the terminology. So he's doing a fantastic job. Go out there and support him, definitely. And
Thank you very much.
Puff, always good to see you, sir.
Thank
I
you.
like the beard, rocking it.
Yeah.
And we'll
I had to
see
get
you
it
guys.
trimmed up a little bit, so you know I didn't want to shame Steve with the beard line.
Yeah, it looks good. We're still Steve. Any updates about Sunday? I want to let everybody know to come check us out Sunday. If
as far as I know, he still wants to have a debate. If you're talking about Sly, but unfortunately, the persons that he was originally having a debate with, they have to go to church. Like they didn't plan on that ahead of time. I don't get it. But he's
On
looking
Sunday.
for somebody else.
They go to church on Sunday.
They already agreed. They already agreed. Everything was said, and now they're turning around and saying, "Oh, you know what? We can't do it on Sunday because there's church." Oh,
that's such bullshit.
You didn't realize that last time when we confirmed all this stuff that you said it was Sunday was fine.
Don't agree to a debate if you're gonna just be a pussy and bring up a bullshit excuse not to do it because you know you're gonna get your ass kicked. That's what's gonna happen.
Yeah,
hopefully,
creation versus reason.
No, flat Earth. There's two good rules of thumb you should go by on the internet. If you're dealing with flat earthers, there's going to be fuckery involved, and scheduling is a nightmare. Or if you're dealing with Nephilim free, either one of those, you're going to have problems. I assure you.
What's a Nephilim?
Maybe we can get
And I'm not even joking on the second part. I've just got a message from Nephi, and it's bizarre as fuck. So because Kyle suggested we do you want me to read this? Because I had nothing to do with asking Nephi except for literally tagging him on a post that you suggested, correct? Because he's thinking that I pulled some kind of sleight of hand bullshit, and I'm like, fuck you, Nephi.
Read it.
All right.
What does it say?
It says, let me get to it again. This is on the Great Debate community. He says,
by the way,
I can't do it. Can anybody do a good Nephi impersonation? Because I can't.
Just read.
You just got something like a drunk, I guess, right? All right. Steve, you're just a poser. Everyone knows it. You talk big trap with your pals, refuse to answer questions endlessly. On rare occasions, you'll enter a hangout with a Christian, then mock what Christians have to say from behind your fence. You say this was an offer for someone named, quote, Hugo and Jake, yet my name was included in a post you made on this thread as a challenge to join the hangout. Then you decided to delete that post. It's still there. You're a silly little poser, Steve. Your cowardice has been noticed.
Huh. Oh,
this was because I had posted. This was my post. I said, and this is, you know what? It was on the Great Debate community. It was a public post. I'm sorry. So it was on my public page. I said, Kyle is asking for any member of the Clown Car Posse if they're interested in having a discussion with Hugo and Jake from Bible Reloaded, August 29th at 8 Eastern, 5 p.m. PDT. And I tagged Antonio Fletcher, Evan Phillips, which is Nephilim Free, Tommy Hall, and Veckel. Correct me if I'm wrong, Kyle, but this was your suggestion to tag these people, and I said fine, but I mentioned on numerous occasions dealing with Nephi is fucking impossible. He is ridiculously fucking complicated to make any kind of arrangements with. You might as well be talking to a brick wall or masturbating with a cheese grater and battery acid. It has the same outcome.
It was my suggestion. However, let me say this.
Why do you bother in the first place?
I don't bother with Nephi. I only did this as a favor to Kyle because he wanted Nephi to come in and talk to Hugo and Jace. Granted, I'm glad we had Wayne come in. Wayne did excellent.
Yeah, me too.
But
me too. That's what I was going to say. And I'm glad that it worked out the way that it did. But you know, I wanted to watch the world burn one night this week, and I figured the best way to do it was invite one of those people on.
But you see how Nephi twists. I mean, But you somebody could twist anything no matter what you do. And Neffy, I was the one that sat down for an hour. Well, hang on. I explained to Neffy how to actually get back online. He was offline for a year. I sat down on my own time for an hour because I'm nice. Because every other person that offered to do because every other person that offered to do it was an atheist, and he doesn't trust atheists. He thinks they're going to sabotage his channel. But he hates me, but he trusted me enough to let me show him how to do it without screwing up his channel, which I did. I would never maliciously do anything to his channel. But
for shame, Steve. It's for shame.
Just amazing, isn't it?
For shame. We've got to close out now, guys. Look, I'm too disgusted right now learning that my co-host brought back something that should have stayed gone, and I need to figure out how to get over.
I said I'd take responsibility for that. I'll pay my penance. Trust me.
But yeah, join us on Sunday at 2 p.m. Eastern. I believe that's correct. Sly Sparkane will be with us. I'm not sure of the flat earther that will be. We are off Monday for Labor Day, so you guys enjoy your Labor Day and stop wearing white, of course. And then we will see you back here on Tuesday for Stated Clearly. John Perry from Stated Clearly will be with us to go over mitochondrial DNA and how that ties into the big debate that happens on Wednesday. After 6 months, the day is finally here. Answers in Genesis will be here on the show in the form of Dr. Nathaniel Jensen, and he will be taking on Dr. Herman Mays on Dr. Jensen's book that recently came out, Replacing Darwin. So D-Day is here finally, and we'll see you Sunday at 2 p.m. Thanks again to ParallaxNick. Check him out. And good to see you again, Puff. And good to see you, as always, ladies and gentlemen. We'll catch you Sunday.
Good night.
Non sequitur. Your facts are uncoordinated.